Hello there everyone and welcome. This is your host Pogawiggy, and today we're going to jump back into one of my favorite games of all time, the lovely Rust. Rust has a special place in my heart, 1,500 hours worth to be exact, and due to the game's ever-changing landscape, every time I come back it's a different experience. And for me, that's part of the joy of the game. Today, as of June 2019, I will give you a rundown on some of the best strats to start out solo or with a small team in Rust. This guide will be formatted so that new and veteran players alike will get a good idea of the most efficient way to start out in Rust, solo or with a small group. Well, let's jump right into it. Before we start the full guide, let's talk about the culture of Rust. Please don't skip this as it's very important. Rust is by its nature designed to be a troll's paradise, and as a result, you will get killed often and when you least expect and desire it. People will hunt you, people will troll you, and some will be kind and helpful. In Rust, never trust anyone you aren't familiar with, because in the end, it will end badly. Avoiding contact with people at all costs is best when first starting out in this game, especially if you wish to maintain longevity. If somebody is too close to you, you are best to kill them and get away. You can make friendships and alliances, and they can last, but don't be surprised in Rust if they don't. Well, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about how to start out in Rust. There are several ways to start out in Rust, but I think the best first step to starting out as a solo is to find a location that you like and hide a sleeping bag in it. This is so that you are able to return to this area if you build anything significant or if you die. An example of a good location will have plenty of resources like mineable rocks and trees, and roads with barrels and plenty of different monuments within easy reach. This will make farming scrap to learn blueprints, aka BPs, much easier down the line. However, these prime locations are often contested, so staying near them is good, but going to a slightly more discreet location is the best option. Also, since fresh spawns aren't going to spawn near the beaches, these areas are typically less of a challenge. There's plenty of PvP with primitive weapons near the beaches, but firearms and players with higher tier loot are typically less common here. The next step is to get all the basic tools you need to build your starter base. These items will be at the very least a stone pick, a stone hatchet, a couple weapons to defend yourself with, like a bow and some spears, and a building plan and upgrade hammer. After you have these tools, you can begin farming for your base. I generally farm up the complete amount of materials that I need for a starter base, and then just build it from there. Another option is to farm these materials in small chunks to prevent losing them, stashing them in the small stashes as you go along. Another option is that you can also take over a previously raided/deserted base. My general method, though, is to just use the starter base, which is a simple 2x1 with an airlock. In Rust, you must never forget the airlock, and you can further design the airlock to give you extra protection by placing doors like this. The materials required for this basic starter base are about 3150 stone, for upgrading to stone walls, and about 3k wood. This should give you plenty of materials for the starter base with a tool cupboard and some wooden doors with key locks. After you have your starter base, you can really start to have fun in Rust. Here's how your starter base may look early on, and here's what it can look like if you use your space efficiently and keep upgrading it. Naturally, you can build an even smaller 1x1 with an airlock, or another starter base of your choosing. I just find this 2x1 with an airlock to be perfect for future expansion if I desire. Well, now that we have our starter base, it's time to commence with the glory that is Rust. But wait, what if we get raided? And that's the question you should always ask yourself in Rust. For me, after I make my starter base, I generally begin to make at least one other starter base before starting a final base build, and to continue maintaining several small bases throughout my time in Rust. In Rust, building small, numerous bases is much more efficient than centralizing your loot in a giant base. This is because, as you build more and more honeycomb, or defensive layers around your base, the cost of materials to do this increases exponentially. This means that smaller bases have more bang for their buck in terms of protection, versus resource costs to build that protection. Also, when you get raided, and in Rust, if you play long enough, you will get raided, you won't feel much of a sting because your loot is all over the place, rather than being centralized in one spot. Medium bases are also very good if you don't centralize too much loot into them. They are also essential if you wish to build a decently defensible base. However, there are some small base designs that you can make that allow you to do the same thing. After you have some nice cribs to chill in, you can work on the more tedious aspect of Rust. Learning more blueprints, or BPs. The goal for me when I play Rust is to get BPs for the end tier loot. Rockets, armored doors, C4, AKs, etc. That's so that I can have a leg up for the next wipe, hopefully yielding a little bit more enjoyment from the game. In order to do this, or to get any blueprint in the game that isn't for the most basic of bitches, you'll need to farm scrap and research new BPs with them. To research BPs, you simply need to craft a research bench to research any specific item that you have with scrap. Or you can use the experiment function on your workbench to get a random BP from that tier of bench that you don't already have. For example, if you spend 1k scrap at a tier 3 bench, you can get AKs, C4, or any tier 3 blueprint you don't already have. The hardest part is farming the scrap and finding the items that you want to research. To find the items that you want, you can kill people, get lucky looting monuments, or ask somebody in chat to craft it for you. Farming scrap is fairly easy, but it is easily the most tedious part of learning BPs in Rust. There are 3 ways to get scrap in Rust. The easiest and most tedious is to farm scrap piles and barrels on the road. Each mineable, non-red barrel will give you 2 scrap, and the piles of scrap that spawn on the road will often have loot crates that have much better items in them than the loot barrels. For example, double barrel shotguns, pistols, and 5 scrap each. Sometimes even a rad suit. This is perfect if you are fresh wiped and have no BPs. Then you can get all the basic free drop BPs and learn some basic stuff you find in these scrap piles along the way. The next way to farm scrap is by far the most reliable and fastest way to get it. And that is to recycle all the items that you find from monument loot rooms. If you get the keycards that you need to get into a monument's main loot area, for example, the top floor of the train yard, you can get anywhere from 100 to 500 scrap per run if you recycle all the items you find. Depending on which monument you go to, you can get more or less loot. I generally try to just save the green and blue keycards so that I can go to the train yard as I am most familiar with this monument, and find that consistently looting it, I get plenty of the scrap that I need to learn the things that I'm interested in the game. The last way to farm scrap is to gamble at the bandit camp, or you can just beg other people for scrap. At the bandit camp, you can wager any amount of scrap you want in a roulette-style game. So in essence, if you're lucky enough, this is the fastest way you can make a lot of scrap. But as it depends on random luck rather than any sort of skill, it's a little bit more of a gray area for me. Well, now you have everything you need to be successful in Rust. First, place a sleeping bag in an area that you like that has plenty of resources around. BPs, mineable rocks, etc. Second, try and get a starter base down. And then after you have a starter base down, you should really try to expand to at least one other starter base, or a slightly bigger, smaller base. The more you expand in Rust, the more likely it is that you'll actually have longevity in Rust, and you won't have to worry about getting raided as much. After you have some more resources, you can go ahead and plan on making a bigger permanent base. Or, at this step, you can focus on getting more BPs. Depending on where you're at in the wipe, for example, if you're fresh wiped on everything, I generally focus on getting BPs at this point, because building a larger base is harder without some of the armored door blueprints, or other more advanced traps in the game, like shotgun traps and auto turrets. After you have the BPs you need, you can really begin to play Rust however you want. For me, it's just all about getting the guns. Once I have the guns, I can go about and actually enjoy just grinding in Rust, building up a bigger base for my own amusement, or trolling people. It's really your game and you decide how to play it. Thanks for watching, everyone. That's it for this episode. If you found this guide to be helpful, please subscribe, like, and comment for more great guides just like this. The next Rust guide that's coming up is going to be an advanced base defense guide, so stay tuned for that. And later on, I will do intricate guides on certain monuments. Well, thanks again, everyone. I hope to catch you all in the next episode.